Okay, so for the step one of setting up your development environment, I want you to understand something about the timing because the timing relates to accepting a invitation that I will send once you give me your GitHub. And then you'll create repos. And if you create repos before accepting the invitation, those repos will be in the wrong location and you'd have to redo them. So just know that if you're submitting your GitHub username at early in the evening or later in the evening, then I'm not going to see it until the next day, but I will the following morning make sure you get those. But the sooner you get the submission of your GitHub username, which is what you needed to do before you got here. So if you just submitted that and then you got here and you're like, well, wait a minute, I want to do this work, and you can't because I haven't invited you. Now I'll also show you what it looks like when I invite you. So then we'll create the repos. And on the repos, the thing I'd just like you to know is I want you to follow my naming standard. So repos are basically what you can think of as like a folder when you create a folder on your computer to store things, right? So, or on Google Drive or wherever you work. But in this case, that folder has a bit more technology built into it to be able to version control all of the things that you write. And then you'll relate those to commits. You'll learn about that in this class. But for the naming standard, use all lowercase, your first name, and then the first letter of your last name. So here's an example of what I'm going to use today because it's my student account, right? So Rio S for student, so it'd be Rio W if it was my own personal ones. And those are generally the way I do it. So let's start with this. In Canvas, you got here by clicking on a video, and above it was this content. So what the step one I already mentioned is you have to accept the GitHub course invitation. So one of the ways you will see this is as soon as you submit it, and as soon as I get, well, not as soon as you submit it, but whenever I get it and invite you, I will reply back in your item for the previous assignment that says, hey, I invited you. So that in this case, you could actually go to whatever email account you use to create your GitHub username. And then you should, if the process all went well, you should get an email. And that email is inviting you to join the course organization. And then you would join it here. Okay. If for some reason you didn't, I'm going to show you another way to do this. But before I do that, so first, this is the easiest way. But in Canvas as well, I give you a link directly there, and I'll show you what that will look like in a minute. But the thing I want you to know is I'm logged into GitHub on the username I have logged in as, so my student account. And for you, most likely when you log in, if you haven't used GitHub before, that's where your login will take you. And so in this case, you might think, well, there's repositories, we call them repo for short, here, and I might want to create them. But you don't want to do that because those are not inside the course organization. Now, how do you get to the course organization? Well, you could just get rid of the username and whatever else, or click on the Canvas URL. But as an example, I hit evidently something else here. If I go here and just go to CIT, and in this case, I'm using 93, but this also applies, and that's what I said on the slide, is this also applies to 28, 82, and 93. Okay. So once you go to that link, again in Canvas, it'll be for your course specific one. You, if you were invited, will see something at the very top that says, hey, you were invited. So it's the equivalent of what was listed in the email account. So here you can go ahead and hit view the assignment or view the invite. And then you can go, yep, let's go ahead and join. So now that you're joined, you're in the organization. Now you can create, and this is what I want you to know now, is you're going to create two kind of repos. You're going to create a private repo and a public repo. That private repo will be for you to submit work to me that is only between you and I. And the public repo is for you to put things that the entire class would see or is possibly part of a course discussion. Okay. So just private between you and I, public is for everyone. So now back over here on GitHub in the organization, we're going to walk through how to create these repos. We're going to do two of them. So we'll do the private one first, and then we'll do the public one. So if you're not there, if you're in the course organization, you click repositories, you will also see that option of new repository there. So we're going to click on there, and now it gives you, hey, you're under this organization. And then here you would use that naming convention that I talked about. Okay. So PRI, right? So for me, my first name, the first letter of the last name, and it is available. I only had one situation where a student had, both were trying to go after the same one, real student account. And no matter what, this is really just a naming standard that can help you and I clearly know which repo you're in. But this is really where it is defined as what type of repo it is. And then we're coming down here and we'll go add a README file. You'll learn about those in the course. And then in here, we are going to add a get ignore file. I'll show you that next. But for this step, just go ahead and select the first one listed, and you'll see why in a minute. Okay. Don't worry about the license and that this will be on the main branch. So go ahead and create that. And when you do that, then you will see the repo that has been created on GitHub with the specifications that you gave it. And there's that funny little get ignore. Notice it starts with a dot, get ignore. So we're basically saying, here's a pattern of files I want you to not track. And you'll see what I mean by track in a minute. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify that file. In the write-up, I've given you a link to a GitHub site, and under that site is some content. And I'm going to go ahead and you do the same as click on that and copy that. And then I'm going to come back to my repo. I'm going to go to that get ignore file and I'm going to hit the edit the file. And I'm going to hit keyboard shortcut Control A, Control V. Doesn't matter. You do it however you want. And now we're going to commit that change. A couple things I'd want you to know. A, we're committing changes directly on GitHub. This will not always, and this will not be the way mostly you do it. And you'll learn through the class how you're setting up a development environment and you're doing your changes there. But you're still learning about commits. And so I'm going to show you what this commit is doing here in a second. So we're going to go ahead and commit the change. In this case, it gives you some default context. You can use it. You don't have to do an extended description. We're going to do it on the main branch. Branches is something you may learn about depending on which course you're in. There we go. So now what did that do? If I go back to my repo, I will notice that that was the initial commit where it created the README file. And now I have, if you noticed it before, it also had initial commit. And now we have update GitHub. And here's what happens when you commit code in this class is it shows me and it shows you here's what was deleted and here's what was added. So a very fine level of detail so that when you're coding along or doing projects, we can see what code you're actually modifying over time. Okay, so that's what version control, and that's what we use GitHub, and you'll see in a bit, Git to accomplish. Okay, so now let's actually do the other one. So remember, as part of this setup, we've done the private one between you and I. And so now you're going to do the public one is for everybody in the course, but we follow the same naming conventions, but instead of PRI for private, we'll do PUB. All right, so back over to GitHub, go back to 93 in here. And by the way, as you start building or as more students come on and set up their repos, you will only see their public ones. You will not see their private repos. So if you think about that, that makes sense because only you and I see your private repos. So let's go ahead and do new. And in here, we're going to now do that same naming standard dash PUB. Okay. And this would be for my public repo. And now here's where I actually have to specify, because remember, this is just a name I've made up, and I want you to use my standards in naming them. So then the public, sorry, Yeah, the public by default, they're private, and so you have to specify that you want them to be public. And then again, this is anyone can see them, not just people in the class, but anyone on GitHub. So go ahead and add again the same idea, and then I'll go ahead and do the same. Remember, what you've done here is just set up the file so we can modify it. No need to choose a license. Create it. Now I'm going to do that same step, and notice here, right? We have the initial commit. So this tells me that initial commit is what set it up. But now I'm going to modify this file, and I'm highlighting this because this is what you're going to learn to do soon in this assignment. Now I still have this in memory, so I don't have to go grab it again. But if you do, you hit edit the file here. Again, I Control A, Control V, and then commit. And again, I want to emphasize that most of the time, this is not how you're modifying code, but especially for the 82 class at the first couple weeks, this is how you're doing it until we set up a local dev environment. And actually, the next video talks about the difference between local and code space. So you'll go to that next, but it looks like we have completed all the steps that are as required. The way you could see that is so you go back to repos and you should see the two repos and possibly other ones listed. And you can always, if you see many, just do a search and find yours and see that your public is your PUB and your private is your PRI, and then you are good to go. All right, hope this helped.